Hey, everybody will know who to blame. Me. Okay, good. We should be live.
Yay!
Or at least we're waiting for YouTube to catch up to us being live.
Well, it's probably still recording, right?
Oh, at the moment it's there we go. We're live.
Okay.
It was buffering mostly. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to tonight's episode. We'll be with you shortly. At the moment, I'm just getting ready to post links so people can join us. I'm sorry for the late start. Afterwards, I'll be doing readings from Varney the Vampire, at least 2 or 3 chapters, to make up for the fact we missed a couple here. Here we go. And I don't hear any keys jangling. Remember, I keep you around for one reason.
Yeah, I was doing the jazz hands.
Ah,
Yeah. I
but
forget.
jazz hands aren't bright and shiny.
It's a little more visual.
True, but people like shiny.
Yeah, it's true.
And I don't hear any keys jangling. Remember, I keep you around for. Oops. I need Facebook catch up with me so I can post. And it's slow down, of course. Stupid internet. Yeah, my internet's running, so that's what's currently the problem. We have no listeners. That's depressing. Yeah, people may yet trickle in.
Or they'll watch it later.
Yeah, also true.
It's not like we've got the option to call in anymore. Like when we used to.
I've been thinking about trying to fix that.
Yeah.
I mean, there are other YouTube channels that do allow it.
Yeah.
True. I was just reaching out to another YouTuber, hoping to get him on the show. I'll fill you in on that more off air for obvious reasons.
Okay.
But he's fun and up our alley, which is a lot of YouTubers actually. We're hardly the only paranormal people on the YouTube.
Oh no.
Okay. One more post and we're ready to go. There we go. We're ready to go. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to tonight's episode of Paranormal Encyclopedia. As always, I'm your host, Kevin Mears, demonologist, paranormal investigator, and the Paranormal Encyclopedia. I am joined by my co-host,
Brian McKinley, godfather of vampire thrillers. Yay.
Yay, indeed. And tonight we're going to be talking about the paranormal as it intersects with the legal system. We're not going to be talking so much about like the Salem witch trials or witch trials in the rest of history because we've done that topic a lot. But we're going to talk about 19th century onwards, mostly 20th century, in fact, cases where the paranormal and law and demonic possession and all that have all gotten mixed with each other.
Yeah.
Which shouldn't come up too much because we're not really going to be talking about laws regarding the paranormal, more cases that have involved the paranormal. But obviously, standard caveat of we're not lawyers. Do not construe anything we say as legal advice. If you do and you get laughed at in court, I don't take blame.
I would be curious though to know how many states still have laws left over on the books that specifically pertain to the paranormal or the supernatural. It would be
That's a
interesting to
really
see.
good question.
Yeah, because they publish all those lists of like weird laws and stuff a lot of times, but I've never seen one that, and I know there had to be some at some point that would have pertained to, witchcraft or, demonic activity or some weird thing that somebody got a bug about.
I'm curious. I'm going to look it up, but
It'd be fun for like a lawyer, maybe.
I would assume. Yeah, there's a couple of lawyers I can think of on YouTube. I wouldn't mind getting on the show. But I mean, if there are, and I'm not certain, I would expect that they would be mostly Connecticut and Massachusetts, which are historically the states that have actually had witch trials.
Yeah.
Although, granted, Pennsylvania had a witch trial as well.
Oh.
And funny enough, the last thing that gets called the witch trial that happened in the United States was 1878, which it actually did take place in Massachusetts, in Salem. And it was a civil case, not a criminal case, but it was, it's considered the second Salem witch trial or the Ipswich witch trial. It was a lawsuit brought by Lucretia L.S. Brown against Daniel H. Spofford. And it didn't actually include witchcraft in any sense that anybody listening to this is likely thinking of. So, and I did find an answer about the thing about the which states, and I'll circle back to that in a second, but I want to talk about the story.
Okay.
So, both of these people were members of a religion known as Christian Science.
Oh, yeah.
And Christian Science believed very strongly in mesmerism, what of course we know as hypnosis. But it's considered, they believe that using hypnosis and using what was known as animal magnetism, which is a long since debunked belief of this type of magnetism or mental control that you could exert and use to cause people to get sick.
Oh.
But at any rate, the woman in the case, Miss Lucretia Brown, was saying that Daniel Spofford was trying to hurt her through his mesmeric powers. It got a lot of attention. It wasn't really a criminal case, so it's not, even if he had lost it, in fact, he didn't. He wasn't going to be put to death or anything like that.
Right. No, but it's interesting that even in civil law, there's been some, some stuff with like the paranormal.
There still is technically, believe it or not. Because what you run into is so to circle back to your question, there are states that have laws against fortune telling, like tarot card reading and similar divinatory practices. And specific religious practices have been challenged in court, some of which fall into this category. Actually, there's an interesting case there, I think, worth mentioning. And the thing to realize in the case of places that have laws against fortune telling is, at least in theory, it's less that they are seen as an occult practice or witchcraft, and more that it's seen as a form of scam and a way of robbing people of their money.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Because I mean, let's face it, 99% of the time it is.
This is true. There's there's whole layers that we could get into with, and I loathe to call them this, but I'll call them this because it is the commonly used term, gypsy fortune tellers.
Yeah. And
to be clear, because I don't want to be a racist asshole, I mean particularly a subset of criminal not all of which are actually Romani by order travelers by birth, that runs this type of scam very traditionally, where they will tell somebody that you have been cursed and you need to give me a large sum of money to undo your curse, and then they will make an egg, and blood will come out in the yolk, and um, often the money will simply disappear. Or we will set the money out, seem to set the envelope, the money in it on fire to purify the unclean money, when really what's happening is they're using common stage magician tricks.
Right.
Um, from what I know, in various bunco squads, law enforcement groups that specialize in this kind of swindle, um, a common response to arresting these types of criminals is that they put a gypsy curse on the law enforcement officer, and these law enforcement officers consider it a badge of honor to have been cursed for it. So that gives you a good idea of how serious it's taken.
Yeah.
Now, that looking up that question reminded me of, that I think is particularly interesting, is that, did you know that animal sacrifice is entirely legal in the United States?
Um, it doesn't surprise me. I mean, I figured that there would be some sort of a religious exemption for that in a lot of places, just because of how many
Yes,
religions practice that in one form or another.
yes, it was. You're absolutely correct. That's what it comes down to. It's protected under the First Amendment with specific restrictions
Hmm.
because of the fact, the Humane Slaughter Act, that requires that animals be killed as painlessly as possible, which is also, of course, actually makes them meat healthier.
Yeah.
Um, a decent argument I've heard made in favor of animal sacrifice being legal is it kind of already is in two different cases. Because under Jewish law, when you slaughter an animal, you have to perform prayers are supposed to be performed, and the animal is supposed to be killed in a very specific way, which is also true in Islamic law, religious law,
Hmm.
with halal,
Yeah.
and that is entirely legal in the United States. But to get much more fringier in terms of our religion, there is a U.S. Supreme Court case against an ordinance that was passed in Hialeah, Florida. So what had happened is the Church of Lukumi Babaluai took the city of Hialeah to court for the right to sacrifice human animals, or to sacrifice animals, non-human animals, not humans. Humans is illegal. What am I talking about?
Yeah.
And on June 11, 1993, the Supreme Court unanimously voted in favor of overturning the decision by the Florida city and explicitly made it legal. There are restrictions on it. The biggest restriction that people run in, that still gets people in trouble, isn't sacrificing animals, but where they do it. Because the thing that you run into is that, well, sure, it's legal to slaughter an animal for religious purposes. And the reality is that, folks, if you're, just to be clear, cultures and religions that perform animal sacrifice don't torture animals and do sadistic sick things. Pretty much, it's very much similar to kosher or halal law, where it's preparing the animal in a ritualistic way and saying prayers over it. Um, in fact, in Santeria and the Church of Lukumi Babaluai and Voodoo, it's considered a affront to the gods that will anger them if you torture the animal unnecessarily while you kill it. Um, and in a lot of, not as much in the United States because we have better access to things, but like in particularly African cultures, the reason why this practice started is very simple. The whole community got together, they killed a bunch of chickens, goats, or the largest that is commonly sacrificed in Africa, you don't see it in the United States, would be a cow. They drain the blood from the animal, which is left as an offering to the gods.
Mm.
Then you eat the meat. It's really just a religious observation to go along with eating, with preparing your food. It's not some evil and sinister thing the way that people think.
Yeah. No, it always made me think of the movie The Devil's Advocate, where Keanu Reeves has to defend Delroy Lindo for sacrificing a goat down in his basement, and
And when people,
he invokes the First Amendment.
yep, where people still get in trouble for it is zoning laws, because you're not supposed to. There's rules about where you can kill animals for food and the circumstances and conditions and things of that nature.
Right.
And some religious groups still get in trouble, not because what they're doing is illegal per se, but because I don't mean to be disrespectful in any way, but many of these churches that we're talking about here, other than obviously Judaism and Islam, are smaller groups within minority populations that don't necessarily have the legal knowledge or the money to hire someone with legal knowledge to know how to navigate all of the requirements.
Right.
But yeah, it's weird, but yeah, it's completely legal, and it's been upheld by the Supreme Court itself. In the 80s, the District Court of Virginia recognized, also on this line, recognized witchcraft as a valid and legitimate religion in Detmer versus Landon. And that would later be upheld by a federal court that decided that people who practice witchcraft as a religion are entitled to the same protections that everyone else has.
Right.
I don't disagree. Obviously, it's like, I don't disagree with this. We should never punish people for what they believe. We should punish people for what they do. Because punishing them for what they believe is thought crime.
Yeah.
It's like, I don't approve of hate speech. I don't approve of bigots. I don't support bigots. I don't want to punish people who haven't done anything, no matter what I think of what they say or they do, or what they say or they think. But let's see. So, why don't we get into one of my other favorite cases, which is Victoria Helen McCrae Duncan, who is a Scottish medium who was the very last person to be imprisoned under the Witchcraft Act of 1735.
Oh.
She was prosecuted. She is the last person in England to be prosecuted as a witch. What's funny is she wasn't prosecuted so much for being a witch as for not being a witch. So there's a lot of history we can get into with her producing ectoplasm and being investigated by famed British ghost hunter Harry Price. Really need to do an episode on him sometime. He is a very interesting character who was actually, very much a believer in spirits. He was a debunker. He exposed a bunch of fraudulent mediums. Again, he's just a really interesting character.
Yeah, kind of like Houdini did.
Yeah, but more of the he believed spirits were out there, and he had experiences with them.
Well, Houdini started out as a believer.
True, but he never claimed to have experienced it.
Right.
So, Helen Duncan was actually had some legal problems in 1933 when she claimed when it was claimed that the spirit of a little girl called Peggy emerged in her seance room. When one of the people sitting grabbed her and flipped out, and the lights were turned on, it was revealed that it was basically a doll.
Huh.
Police were called. She was persecuted and fined the overwhelming fine of £10.
Huh.
But the one that got her in far more trouble involves the sinking of a ship called the HMS Barham. So in 1941, November, she holds a seance in Portsmouth, where she claimed the spirit materialization of a sailor told her that HMS Barham, had been sunk. Where this first becomes a serious problem is that it was still classified the ship had been sunk. The only people it had been released to were relatives of the casualties on board. It wasn't even announced. It wasn't announced publicly until 1942.
Hmm.
And they started taking interest in her. Two lieutenants were in her audience in a seance in January 14th of 1944, and one was impressed with some of her various tricks. But their first concern was, is she a witch? It's, wait, is there a leak somewhere? Is classified information being released to the public
Hmm.
in a way that it shouldn't be? And investigation subsequently showed no. The reality is what had happened was actually pretty publicly known. Letters of condolence had already been sent out to the families of the 861 people who died. So even if we're talking about maybe 10 people in each family, that's 9,000 people who knew about the sinking.
Hmm.
It's like, yeah, the answer is that she didn't have psychic powers. It's the old saying about three can keep a secret if two of them are dead.
Yeah.
Word got out. She heard about it. She used that information to her advantage. This angered the English government, particularly because of the two lieutenants being involved. It kind of ticked off the Navy, and they brought her up on charges based on the Witchcraft Act.
Hmm.
Now, originally the Witchcraft Act had banned the practice of witchcraft. That changed in 1735 when they changed it to make it illegal to falsely proclaim to pure spirits. Basically, in 1735, they still call it the Witchcraft Act. They changed it so that it is now illegal to claim to have magical powers you don't have.
Ah, cool.
That act was then overturned again because they kind of found it a little overly broad, and her case played a part in it getting overturned. And it was replaced in 1951 by the Fraudulent Mediums Act, which itself was basically folded into the regular laws about fraud.
Right.
Because really, it isn't about claiming to be a medium, it's about claiming to be able to do something you can't actually do.
Right.
Which is already illegal pretty much everywhere. But yeah, that would be the last British witch trial. Sadly, the ugly reality, and yet another topic for us to get into sometime, is neither of these is by any stretch of the imagination the last witchcraft trials worldwide. Because in parts of Africa, parts of the Middle East, New Zealand, New Guinea, and some other places, witch trials are still going on today.
Wow.
People are kicked, even small children are kicked out of their communities on the crime of witchcraft. And that is a really big subject that we need to research and come back to. I don't feel confident talking about it now, other than to say, yeah, this is happening. Dear God, is it awful?
Yeah, I know that in a few Native American communities, even in America, there are still accusations and sometimes crimes committed in the name of witchcraft or the belief that someone is a witch and has cursed someone else. There have been like murders and such committed against people believed to be skinwalkers or witches.
Certainly, if somebody's claiming to be, setting aside if such things exist or not from them, if somebody's claiming to be a skinwalker, that somebody is really screwed up, because under Navajo tradition, to become a skinwalker, you have to murder a member of your own immediate family.
Oh yeah, no. Usually, it's not a case of somebody claiming it. It's
somebody else is claiming
that,
this person is one.
Yeah, some old guy is a skinwalker because obviously he's lived too long, or
long
members
and
of
yeah,
members of his family died under mysterious circumstances or something. And yeah,
various other
it
nonsense.
gets crazy like that. Yeah.
Then there's a whole other thing that we can get into when we get into modern witch trials, which is medicine killings,
Hmm.
which are a real problem in parts of Africa that actually does border on witchcraft.
Hmm.
Um,
Well,
but
let's go to the other thing you were talking, like the legally haunted house, because that's kind of fun.
the Ackley family home in New York. It is the first was the first it was the first home in the United States to be declared haunted. In the case of Trambovsky versus Ackley, also known as the Ghostbusters ruling. Family moves into house, and no less, this is in Nyack, New York, so we're actually talking pretty close to Sleepy Hollow,
Hmm.
which adds a whole other level of awesome to this.
Yeah.
It's a home from the Victorian period, but family lives in the home. Weird things happen. They move out. They bring a lawsuit against the owners of the home because of the fact, and ironically, to the surprise of many at the time, because this was quite recent. This was, I want to say, the '80s
Hmm.
or not. It was the '80s or '90s because I remember I was in school when it happened. But the question becomes, what do you do if your house is haunted? And the judge famously quipped, you can call if you have rats, you can call an exterminator, but who are you going to call for ghosts? And here's the thing about this: it sounds absurd, but it really isn't. Because here's the thing: in most states, and apparently in New York is a bit of an exception to this, because New York operates on the idea of "Kavit emptor, buyer beware." But in most states, you are required by law to disclose anything about a house that lowers the property value.
Right.
Even setting aside the question of, is there a ghost in this home? The reputation for being haunted lowers the property value. And this wasn't, just that they moved in and had these weird experiences. All the neighbors talked about how the house was haunted. It was locally known to be a haunted house. And that was the issue. It wasn't an issue of there's ghosts and we can't do anything about it, because of course they could do something about it. They could call someone like me. Or at the time it would have been N. Lorraine Warren, would have been the prominent people in the field. But I think they may actually have been involved, though I'd have to look it up. But there's the reality of this house has a reputation that, particularly back then, because it is like it is now, where sometimes being haunted would be a selling point today.
Yeah. I was just thinking that.
But in the '80s, the paranormal wasn't as widely accepted as it is now. People are less likely to buy the house. Since that wasn't disclosed at the time of purchase, that would be why they won the lawsuit. And from what I understand, I've heard that there have been similar cases a few other times. And when they go the way of the person, again, the decision goes in based on property values. Just like it's required in most states that if someone was murdered in your house, you have to disclose that when you sell it.
Right. Yeah. Because some people are really put off by that.
Yes. And again, the reputation of having a murder take place there affects property value.
Yeah.
And for that matter, this also cycles back into it's probably supposed to be haunted, which affects property value. But I got a huge amount of press at the time, and everybody freaked out. I was like, oh my gosh, it's a legally haunted house. And it kind of is. Yeah, the court essentially ruled that, yes, the claim was justified. The house is haunted, that you pay up. So I think there's another very famous case we can touch on, which kind of ties the last three subjects I looked up together, which is the very famous thanks to the movie that came out um, a not that long ago, The Exorcism of Lily Rose,
Yeah.
which is the
What
case of
sparked
Annalise
my idea for
Michelle.
this episode was that and She-Hulk. Those two things combined made me think of the idea for this episode.
Which was an excellent idea for an episode, I have to give you. But Annalise Michelle is a woman who the report is became possessed, and a pair of Catholic priests were brought. She was under psychiatric treatment at the time. She had been um, diagnosed with having epileptic seizures,
Hmm.
and priests were brought in to perform an exorcism. Um, the priests claimed apparently that they never saw her having seizures, and that she, quote unquote, didn't look like an epileptic, whatever that means.
Huh.
Um, an extended exorcism was performed, during which which she wasn't eating properly. She was taking her medications, and eventually, sadly, she died on July 1st, 1976.
Hmm.
The autopsy report stated the cause of death was malnutrition and dehydration, resulting from almost a year in a state of near starvation while the rites of exorcism were performed.
Wow.
At her death, she weighed 30 kilograms, which for us Americans would be 66 pounds. Suffered broken knees from continuous genuflection, was unable to move without assistance, and was reported to have contracted pneumonia.
Wow.
The two priests that performed the exorcism and her parents were investigated, and the state prosecutor would maintain that her death could have been prevented as late as 1 week before her death. So they were charged with negligent homicide. They were defended by Eric Schmidt Leichner, who was apparently famed Nuremberg trials defense lawyer.
Hmm.
And then, the family was, and then, of course, the priest was paid for by the church. The state recommended none of the involved parties be jailed. Instead, they recommended the sentence for the priests was a fine, and the parents should be exempt from punishment because they had suffered enough,
Hmm.
which is a mitigating factor under German penal law.
Hmm.
Trial would begin on March 30th, 1978. Eventually, yes, they were found guilty. The priests were fined. Nobody went to prison. What's interesting about this, that I'm particularly qualified, I keep meaning to research the case in more detail to do an episode about it.
Yeah.
But I can comment on the fact that the priests involved, and I'm sorry, specifically, they received suspended prison sentences and were required to share the cost of legal proceedings. But the priests did not follow Catholic law on exorcism, and this is important. Because, one, under Catholic law, under Catholic canon law, and under the terms of the Ritual Romana, which is the book that contains the rituals for exorcism, anyone undergoing an exorcism is supposed to be kept under medical supervision, and particularly if any form of restraint is involved. At no time is it ever recommended that they be denied food or denied medications. In particular, the church is not supposed to get involved in exorcisms when someone is suffering a condition like epileptic seizures, for God's sakes.
Yeah.
No, that's not demon possession, it's epilepsy. The bishop, which would be the person who had to sign off to get an exorcism performed in the Catholic Church, a priest needs the permission of at least his bishop, if not somebody higher in the church. The bishop, who would be the person who signed off on it, claimed he didn't know about her epileptic seizures. And here's the other thing. It is absolutely true that both in the Bible and in the ritual of exorcism, fasting is recommended during an exorcism. Can you guess where they screwed up? You want to take a guess?
Well, obviously they had her fasting for far too long.
That's true too, but there's an even more fundamental mistake. It's the priest that's supposed to do the fasting.
Oh, okay.
I, I've, as people know, I've read fairly extensively, talked to exorcists and such on this subject. I've never seen anything in the Catholic Church or anyone else who follows Catholic ritual standards suggesting that a person being exorcised should be denied food or water or medicine. In fact, quite the opposite.
Right.
This was far more like some of the kookier faith healing deliverance ministries than a Catholic ritual of exorcism. I am not, this is not defensible, nor am I claiming I can defend it. But they didn't even do things the way they should have done it.
Yeah.
I do not know if Annalise Michelle was possessed. I suspect that no living person, other than the priests and maybe her family, knows for sure if she was possessed. But I'm very skeptical, and I'll point out one of the most obvious reasons why. During the exorcism, she claims, among other things, to have been possessed by Lucifer, Belial, Hitler, Caesar, Nero, and Judas Iscariot. For a start, Caesar, Nero, and Judas are people. People don't. In Catholic doctrine, generally speaking, ghosts don't have the ability to possess a person. A good counter that the movie Exorcism of Emily Rose makes is that she wasn't possessed by Hitler himself. She was possessed by the demon that possessed Hitler. The other problem would be Hitler, Lucifer has better things to do with his day than to possess some random German girl.
Yeah.
Belial as well, who's one of the high-ranking devils in hell. These devils don't settle for Miss Nobody in Germany. There are counter arguments to that. One of which being that there has been a move since her death to canonize her as a saint. Because she's actually thought to have been what's called the soul victim. I've talked a lot on this show about the theological idea of grounds, that you only become possessed when you do something that gives the spirit permission to enter your life and enter your body.
Mm-hmm.
The case I don't talk about very much, mostly because it almost never happens, is what's called the soul victim. Some people are so pious or so pure that draws demons to them. This happens at most once in a generation or twice in a generation. And most of the people that kind of fall into this category, you've heard of. The most famous recent example, although he wasn't possessed, but he was badly tormented by demons, is Padre Pio, who has since been made a saint. There's a whole lot of other saints that fall into this category as well.
Didn't what's his name, Martin Luther, kind of believe that he fell into that category? Like, didn't he supposedly claim that the demons constantly harassed him personally or something?
I know there's this particular story that one night when Luther was working on his writing in the one monastery, Satan himself appeared to him, which inspired Luther to pick up the inkwell he was writing with and throw it at the devil. To the great disappointment of Christians everywhere, the devil disappeared and shattered against the wall.
Yeah.
Though apparently you can go to this monastery or church, whichever it was, and see the ink splatter from when this happened. It's still on the wall. But it wouldn't surprise me if I don't know that much about Martin Luther's life, so I can't say for certain. But it
I
wouldn't
just
surprise me.
remember hearing it in the midst of like some documentary about him claiming something with like the devil.
Yeah, and it's a recurring theme. A bunch of early saints and martyrs and things like that. Saint Anthony also was supposed to have been plagued by demons.
Hmm.
Um, which is why apparently in some Eastern European countries, his feast day is associated with demons and vampires because of that torment that he went through. Um, but again, this is absurdly rare, and I know that Father Joe, the exorcist I used to work with, told me once he didn't think she would have been an example of this, although I never got a chance to get him to elaborate on why.
Hmm.
We'll come back to this case sometime down the road because this is something I think worth getting into. It's an interesting case, and I've been asked about it before.
Yeah.
But there are two more cases I want to talk about because we're running out of time.
Right.
The first of which is Michael Taylor, who in 1974 was involved in the Osset murder case in England. While at home, Taylor brutally murdered his wife, Christine. He attacked her with his bare hands, tearing her eyes and tongue out, almost tearing her face off, then strangling their poodle. He was found by a policeman naked in the street, covered in blood. At his trial in March, he was acquitted on the grounds of insanity and sent to Broadmoor Hospital for the next 2 years. Then he would spend another 2 years in a secure ward at Bradford before being released. What brings this into this category is that he was allegedly possessed by a demon. Um, let's see. His wife had started a Christian fellowship group to achieve belong. His relationship with the lay leader of the group was carnal in nature. And the leader was a woman by the name of Marie Robinson, so we're not talking about a homosexual thing here. He admitted he felt evil in him. He attacked Robinson verbally, which turned into a shouting match. He received an absolution, and his behavior continued to be more erratic. The vicar was called in. Other ministers who were experiencing deliverance showed up to cast the demon out of him, which would happen October 5th and 6th of 1974. And was aided an Anglican priest with the assistance of a Methodist clergyman as well. Supposedly, according to Bill Ellis of Authority on Folklore and the Occult in Modern Culture, the exorcists believed that they had, in an all-night ceremony, invoked and cast out at least 40 demons, including incest, bestiality, blasphemy, and lewdness. And then at the end, exhausted, they allowed him to go home. Although they felt that at least 3 demons, insanity, murder, and violence, were still left in him. And then, of course, he goes home and he murders his wife.
Wow.
But, yeah, this is as close to Devil Made Me Do It working in court as I'm aware of.
Wow. Yeah, that's pretty crazy.
Which leads to the last case I want to mention, which has gotten a bit of fame recently.
Right.
Which is the trial of Arne Cheyenne Johnson, which is the first known court case in the United States in which the defense sought to prove innocence based on demonic possession. Happened November 24th of 1981 in Brookfield, Connecticut. It didn't work then either. I mean, it didn't even work as well as it did in England, basically.
Yeah.
Although it's worth noting that while it was brought up and people talked about the fact he supposedly was demonically possessed, and Ed and Lorraine Warren actually talked to the police about this because they were involved, had been involved in his case for some time before this happened.
Right.
Um, when he actually went to court, they tried a plea of not guilty by virtue of possession, but the presiding judge rejected it immediately.
Yeah.
Argued that such defense
Surprised.
could never exist in a court due to lack of evidence that would be irrelative and unscientific to allow related testimony.
Yeah.
Um, at which point, rather than go with the insanity defense, which might have been the next logical step, they simply went with a self-defense plea. But because they went with a self-defense plea, nothing related to the supposed demonic possession was admissible in court. And after 15 hours, he was convicted of first-degree manslaughter, sentenced to 10 to 20 years in prison, of which he only actually wound up serving 5.
Wow.
This case received fame because it was first the subject of a book by Henry Martin called The Devil in Connecticut. It was then subject to a television movie in the 80s called The Demon Murders Case. It is also very, very, very loosely the inspiration for the very recent third Conjuring movie, The Devil Made Me Do It.
Ah.
I'm inclined to believe he was possessed because I'm inclined to agree with the Warrens. I know that the family of the kid that was basically the brother of his fiance or at least girlfriend had been possessed by a demon. And during the attempts to exorcise the kid, the story is the demon jumped to the guy, and that's what caused the murder. After he challenged the demon to come into him and leave the little kid alone. The brother of the kid has since claimed that the whole thing was made up, never happened. That basically the Warrens exploited him and his family on the promise of a book deal and all this other stuff. And it has since been revealed that the publisher of the book did pay the family $2,000, which even in the 80s is not that much money.
No.
They last I had heard, the brother and the kid that was originally possessed were supposed to be working on a book on the subject. But I haven't heard anything about that in years. I don't know if it was actually published or anything of that nature.
Yeah.
It's a weird case, I'll grant you. I don't know what, honestly, I make of it.
Yeah.
So, Paranormal and Law today. Needless to say, no, The Devil Made Me Do It is not a viable defense in any court in the United States. Oh, there's the obvious one I didn't even mention. Arguably the first attempt to make a legally haunted house, Amityville.
Oh, yeah.
Which is, I was actually just thinking the other day, I know enough about the case having interviewed many of the principals, and the case is interesting and complicated enough. It's really worth its own episode.
Yeah, I think we may have actually done at least part of an episode where we talked for a while about Amityville, because I remember you telling me about a lot of the ins and outs.
We've talked about it a couple of times. I like to do a more thorough examination, which will mean going back and listening to the interviews I took part of with of George Lutz and Kathy Lutz and Chris Lutz and Lorraine Warren, all of which you can find on YouTube, by the way, if anybody's interested. If you look up Amityville Horror Week Lou Gentili. So you don't have to just take my word for it. Go listen to George Lutz and Kathy Lutz and even one of the 3 children, Chris Lutz, talk about what happened in that house. It's an interesting different take on the situation. So you had originally wanted to chime in with some questions. Do you have any questions about what we covered?
Well, I asked a couple at the beginning. I remember those are, I think that's most of what I had prepared.
Fair enough.
Obviously, the whole Devil Made Me do a thing. Has anybody ever tried to, well, that you know of,
Mhm.
tried to sue over um, like witchcraft, like having been cursed by somebody, like maybe down in New Orleans or someone in the in the voodoo community that really believes in that sort of stuff?
That's a really good question.
Has that ever made it into court?
Um, and to my understanding, technically, not only has it, but it is in fact possible to sue someone, or even takes at least hypothetically possible to file criminal charges against somebody for cursing you.
Hmm.
Um, Again, there's a lot. There's some logic here that doesn't necessarily involve belief in magic, just by virtue of you know saying I'm going to lay a curse on you so that you will get sick and die is still a curse. Is still a threat
Hmm.
potentially. It's like you're still making a threat against somebody's life.
Okay.
I don't know how many times it's stood up in court,
Right.
but I believe it's at least hypothetically possible to oh wait, in fact, I found a case.
Oh, cool.
Oh God help us! There was a lawsuit that happened. Um, Negligence case, Geneva Hospital. Apparently, that alleged a psychologist had formerly worked there used witchcraft in treating patients. So not cursing somebody, but still using a lawsuit involving witchcraft. And there is a reality that we talked about the other week in our episode about curses,
Hmm.
that if somebody really truly believes that they've been cursed, that will negatively impact their health
Yeah.
because of psychosomatic death. They can even die. This is particularly true in cultures that have very strong beliefs in magic, which certainly many people in New Orleans, practitioners of traditional Afro-Caribbean religions, will qualify as. Um, so, will it stand up in court? I don't know. I'm curious now. I'm going to do a little bit more research, so maybe we'll revisit this down the road. But there's at least a possibility that somebody could make this argument, and may have in fact made this argument. Um, okay, we should probably wrap up soon, given it's coming up on 9 o'clock.
Yeah, it's a good time.
I need to still need to. Yeah. I still need to try to read a chapter or two out of Arne the Vampire. That's which I need to run the bathroom. I do want to tell everybody now. Unfortunately, we will not be having a show next Thursday. Maybe you said, Brian, Friday and Saturdays and Sundays are usually good for you.
Not Fridays, but well, it depends on the Saturday and Sunday, but yeah.
So maybe we can find another day next week to do the show.
Yeah, we might be able to.
Or even I can potentially do one without you if I have to, although I'd rather not.
Sure.
But basically, it comes down to I'm going to be giving a speaking engagement, and I'm going to get a speaking engagement on demonology in Pennsylvania next Thursday. My speaking engagement starts at 8. It is over 2.5. It's about a 2.5 hour drive to get there. So there's no way on earth I could do a show at 7 and go do the speaking engagement at 8. And they're paying me for it. So I'm sorry, guys. I'm going to go with the money. I don't actually feel sorry about that. I love doing this show, but I'm not getting paid to be here. Speaking of, if you've enjoyed tonight's show, and if you enjoy what we do in general, please consider giving us a like, a comment, maybe even subscribing if you haven't. There's that bell notification thing you can hit when we have a new video. It is usually going to be Thursdays at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time or Eastern Daylight Time or whatever they're calling it this week. I got completely confused when they changed that. We also have a Facebook page, the Paranormal. You got to put the "the" in there because Paranormal Encyclopedia by itself has its own Facebook page. Um, you can follow us there, and I put up info about the next show and topic and things like that. Usually, at least the day of, if not the night before. Um, you can also just keep an eye on here. I try to put things in the comments. But yes, like, comment, subscribe. If you have a couple bucks to donate, you can always consider going to our Patreon or to the PayPal, both of which are in the description. Remember, of course, that our content is and will always remain free. We're not going to be charged for the privilege of watching my show, even if I eventually turn into a huge hit and have thousands of viewers and money rolling in. That's not what I'm here to do. But if you want to help, we always appreciate it. Brian and I both work regular jobs. This gets expensive. But that's going to do it tonight, ladies and gentlemen. Sadly, I think that the readings from Varney the Vampire are going to wait till tomorrow because I can feel my voice starting to crack. I don't think I'm up to reading a chapter or two chapters. I apologize for everybody who enjoys that, but I'll get one. I'll get at least a couple done this weekend, I promise.
Sure.
But that's it until sometime next week. Check the Facebook page to find out when. This is Kevin Mears saying good night and God bless.
Brian McKinley saying keep your fangs sharp.
Good night, everybody.